is Anas, and I'm going to sing for you. I'm a Syrian refugee. I came in 2017, and we're breathing. This is the second time we are invited in Arab, and for this lovely event. I'm going to dedicate this song for Gaza people and the people who feel right now what is happening in the other side of the world. موطني الجلال والجمال والسلام والبهاء في رباء والحياة والنجاة والهناء والرجاء في علا في علا. هل أراك سالما منعما وغانما مكرما سالما منعما وغانما مكرما هل أراك في علا تبلو السما تبلو السما موطني موطني. موطني الشباب لن يكل همه أن يستقل في رواء نستقي من الردى ولن نكون للعدا كالعبيد كالعبيد. موطني الجلال والجمال والسلام والبهاء في رباء والسناء والنجاة والهناء والرجاء في هواء في هواء.
Hello everyone. Anas is a great voice from Syria, and I play oud. My name is Ibrahim and I'm Syrian. I've been playing this for a long time. I grew up with it most, so it's kind of it's even a family tradition. So my grandfather played it, my father played it, and then I played piano, and then I just felt like I gotta be a Saker, that's my last name, so I had to play it again. And yeah, I'm very happy with all of you coming here and taking your time to hear some of the Syrian music. Part of it is intangible heritage that has to be preserved to what's happening now, and I'm happy to be a messenger for my culture, for you guys to hear. We're going to be performing some Aleppo, the traditional music for Sabah Fakhri. It's more rhythmic than this. So yeah, I hope you enjoy.
This is from Aleppo. It is kind of like history repeats itself when the Andalusian, let's say, songs and anthems came and adapted by the Arabs and sing it from their own way. And this song dated back, long time ago. It is one of the folklorian Syrian songs. This is also the tune called Hijaz. So for those who knows the Hijaz is in the series of mountain in Saudi Arabia. So they have their own approach into the music, their own ways, and later the musicians made a note about it called Hijaz. And it's somehow related to the Islamic connotations, the adhan also, that can be done in the same way. فالحب ديني والصبابة مذهبي قسما بموسى والمسيح والنبي إني أغار من الكوس فلا تشربي. فوق النخل فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق
مجرى المية بسلم عليهم عليهم صعبان الفرقة علي يا بشتقنا إليهم إليهم والله يا مجرى المي يا بسلم عليهم عليهم صعبان الفرقة علي يا بشتقنا إليهم إليهم والله ما أريد تاليني بلا والبلبل نغى غصني الفل يا شريك النعمان والبلبل نغى غصني الفل يا شريك النعمان
قصدي ألاقي محبوبة قصدي ألاقي محبوبة غير الياسمين والريحان يا عين غير الياسمين والريحان أيوة
قلبي تلوع يا عادي بدي طبيبي يداوي قلبي تلوع يا وعدي بدي طبيبي يداوي دوا الطبيب ما بينفعني دوا الطبيب ما بينفعني شوفت حبيبي تشفيني يا عيني
شوفت حبيبي تشفيني قدك المياس يا عمري يا حصين البال اليسر قدك
كالمياس يا عمري يا غصين البالي كاليسر
انت احلى الناس في نظري جل من سواك يا عمري قدك المياس يا عمري
يا غصين البالي كاليسر
قدك المياس يا عمري
يا غصين البالي كاليسر
انت احلى الناس في نظري جل من سواك يا عمري
Thank you guys.
Are we done?
This was our last song. Sorry. We didn't let you know. Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
But if you stay at the end also, we're gonna play more. Thank you very much.
give it up again for Anas Al Hassan and Bero Sakar. I'm going to take a second to rearrange the seats here, so bear with me, and then I'll introduce everyone properly. Talk amongst yourselves, please. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Alice Mackay Room at the Vancouver Public Library. My name's Jorge Amigo, and I'm the head of cultural programming here. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'm an immigrant from Mexico, which means I'm a settler in these lands, so I feel a particular responsibility to continually learn about the ongoing effects of colonialism in this part of the world and to do my part as a public servant to move towards reconciliation and decolonization. Now, speaking of moving towards that, has anyone here heard of the Yellowhead Institute? One of you, okay, great. So it's a research institute based out of Toronto Metropolitan University, and they publish an annual report on Canada's progress on reconciliation. Now, as you may remember, in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued 94 calls to action, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau personally promised to implement them. So how do you think we're doing with that? I hear some laughter. Okay, yeah. So after 8 years, only 13 of the 94 calls to action have been completed since 2015, and we completed absolutely 0 of them in 2023, last year. So that's a completion rate of only 2 calls to action per year, which means that at this pace, it's going to take another 58 years until the calls to action are completed, which means Indigenous peoples are going to have to wait until 2081 for reconciliation. So I share that because I feel like when we do land acknowledgements, for them to be meaningful, they need to lead to some action. And the action that I'm hoping with that is that we all take time to read that report. It's Yellowhead Institute. Just Google that. It'll be right there, first hit. And just learn why we're failing, how we're failing, and the impact that that failure has on our society. So let's move on into what we're gathered here today. A quick show of hands, who's been in this room before? Okay, most of you, awesome. So for those of you who haven't been here, a couple of housekeeping notes very quickly. The bathrooms are located right outside this door to the right. Please take a second right now to silence your cell phones. It's okay if you keep your phones on. We love it if you take pictures and videos and show the world that you're at a very cool library event. Post on social media if you want. Please tag us. We love it when you tag us. Just make sure your phone's not a symphony of little dings and beeps. And our bookseller for today is Massey Books. They're our friends over there. They're wonderful, incredible bookstore in Chinatown. Please go buy a book or 2 or 3 or more. And so today we're gathered here because we get to hear about this incredible book right there on the screen, which takes us to the largest Syrian refugee camp in the world, where more than 80,000 people live. And the book shares the stories of the residents there through food and through their traditions. Unfortunately, Mohammed Shwamra, who is a resident of the camp and one of the producers of the book, who is going to be here, cannot make it. So it's too sad. But we're going to have a conversation between Karen Fisher and Nihal Elwan. So I'm going to briefly introduce them. And after I do that, Karen's going to come here and give us a brief presentation. And then they're going to have a conversation. So Karen Fisher is a professor at the Information School and adjunct professor in the Communication Department at the University of Washington. She's also an embedded field ethnographer for the UNHCR in Jordan. And Karen's work is, her focus is the Syrian war, and she works in the Levant, and much of her work is at the UNHCR Zaatari Camp in Jordan, where she has led projects like the Zaatari Camp Cookbook, which is a multi-year co-design project with over 2,000 Syrians about preserving indigenous knowledge of food, Arab medicine, and culture. And she's also led a project called the Zaatari Camp Libraries, the world's first refugee-run camp-wide library system. Amazing. So glad you're here. Thank you. And then Nihal Elwan is the founder of Tayybeh Foods, a social enterprise and a caterer and a food processor and a restaurant, with a mission to empower and uplift newcomer and refugee women from Syria and the Middle East. Since its inception in 2017, Tayybeh has received multiple awards. There's a whole long list. I'm going to read only a few of them. It was Foodies of the Year by Western Living Magazine, Champion of Women Award from Voices of Muslim Women, the City of Vancouver's Award of Excellence, and most recently, the Enterprise of the Year Award by the Francophone Chamber of Commerce. Also, Nihal's academic background is in anthropology and international development studies in economics, and she has over 15 years of professional experience researching, implementing, and monitoring economic and social inclusion programs with a special focus on gender and women's issues in the Middle East. So I can't think of a better pairing of you two to have a conversation about this. So very excited to have you here. Karen, join us on stage to do the presentation. How's this volume for everyone? Do you want me to crank it up? Go up?
Thank you. Thank you for this lovely, lovely introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. I have to say that this is the first event in all of Canada to launch our Zaatari book. So I'm just so excited to be here. And also, I'm from Newfoundland, and I'm just so delighted, absolutely delighted. Okay, so welcome to Zaatari Camp. Welcome, everybody. Oh, just one sec here. Okay, now, you're officially welcome to Zaatari Camp. I'm going to show you a lot of photographs from inside the camp, and of course, there's many other great photographs in the book. But this is a shot here of the caravans, the homes that people live in. I'd like to start first by saying Bismillah. And the Islamic world, we always start all of our initiatives by saying Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, which means in the name of God. And this piece of Bismillah is written by a calligrapher in camp. Just a little bit about the Syrian war. I can't believe it's 2011. Since 2011, you know, with all conflict, we think that, oh, it'll be over in a couple of weeks, we'll go home, 6 months. Wait, no, but believe it or not, the statistics show that for the average refugee, they're going to spend over 30 plus years living in a refugee camp. Many generations now will be born in a camp. For Syria, since 2011, over 16 million people have been displaced. That's like half the population. Just think, like 40% of Canada just suddenly displaced. With regard to this displacement, just over half have been in place internally inside of Syria, and then 6 million in the border countries. And this is very common, you know, if you're fleeing your country for war, you know, if you're very wealthy and so forth, maybe you will, you know, be able to leave earlier to go to another, maybe Europe, somewhere like this. But for most refugees, they end up going to the border of the nearest country. So for people in the south of Syria, they went to Jordan. In the north, you had people going to Turkey, you know, and in the west, you had people going to Lebanon. In terms of casualties, this is really unfortunate, but around in 2015, 2016, the UN, they stopped counting the casualties, but they figured that the civilian deaths are at least 500,000. Something that we don't talk about quite as much, though, are indirect deaths. So this is when a person dies, but they were not actually targeted, you know, as part of the war. But we say that the general rule of thumb is that for every direct death, there's 4 indirect deaths. So for that 500,000, we're looking at around 2 million. But for Zaatari, Alam Bikfi, welcome to Zaatari. What we have here is a sheikh in the camp, and he's holding out Arabic coffee. And there's a wonderful ritual around Arabic coffee that maybe Nihal and I will get into. A little bit about Zaatari. So Zaatari started in 2012. It's the desert. You know, it's right on the border. It's very, very barren there. And basically overnight in July 2012, maybe 30 or 40 people crossed over the border. Within the next year, over 1 million Syrians had come in through Zaatari Camp. In the beginning, the UNHCR and the UN World Food Program, they were there assisting with, you know, providing shelters and tents, you know, and food and things like this. But Zaatari today has about 83,000 people. In its heyday, it had 140,000. It's considered to be the 4th largest city in Jordan. And it's very interesting. I said that people from the south, they're from a region, a province that's called Dara, which is also known as the cradle of the revolution, where the war actually started. Of that 83,000 people who were there, Zaatari has about 80 to 100 babies a week. There's just so many. Over 55, 60% of the world population are children, and only about 3% are over age 60. And there's different reasons for this. What is really fascinating about Zaatari, though, is that in the first 6 months of Zaatari's development, it surpassed in innovation, entrepreneurship, and businesses what any other refugee camp would take 20 years. Nobody knows how many businesses there are, but we say there's probably about 3,500 micro businesses inside the camp. Not all refugee camps are like this, but Zaatari certainly is. It's a high security, high constrained, low resource environment. And what I mean by this is that if you live in the camp, you have to get permission from the Jordanian security to leave the camp. And your permit is only good for so many days or so many weeks. And if you come back in the evening, you had to be back inside the camp at a certain time. You're not guaranteed to get a permit. Same if you want to enter the camp, you have to have a permit for this. So either you're working inside the camp with a UN organization, or maybe you're someone like myself and you have to have permission from the Jordanian security again, and your permit is only good for so long, and many different checkpoints going in and out of the camp. You also need permits to bring all kinds of materials into Zaatari. Everything, you need to have a permit. And probably the most difficult item that I've experienced getting into camp, can anyone guess what that might be? One of the most difficult items to bring into the camp? Yeah, books. Believe it or not, books. Books. Inside Zaatari, there are no bookshops. There's no newspapers. For many, many years, there was no internet access. Now there is internet, but the service is very, very weak, and same thing with mobile service. Here's a lovely a quote from an older woman in the camp. She's a Bedouin woman. You can see the beautiful, tattoo that she had on her face that would have been done when she was a child. And she says that people brought to Zaatari many of the old ways of Syria that most had thought were long, long forgotten. Ways of cooking, healing, and especially eking out a living in the barren desert. So leaving Syria and surviving the war meant returning to Syria to an older time. How about refrigerating without modernity, jury-rigging generators and pumps to stave off freeze and floods, and using herbs and foods that keep the body healthy and cure afflictions. And I just love what she said here, because it really resonates with all the time that I spent, in the camp. A little bit about me, 6 years of doing design ethnography just in Zaatari Camp. That's how long it took us to do this book. I created the book with over 2,000 Syrians, men, women, children, old people, people with disabilities, because it was really important to have inclusion. And to do this, I did a lot of what we call home visits, so just spending time in people's homes. And a lot of this was co-cooking, because I tell you, that's really the best way to learn about somebody's life. Is, certainly do this all over Canada and certainly in Newfoundland. The best times are always in the kitchen. Spending time just walking around the camp, because the magic of Zaatari is that you never know what you're going to see every day. I say you go with an open heart, and it's just incredible. People were keeping little diaries for me at different points when I'm there, and doing workshops. And a workshop is a euphemism for like a community gathering, where we just get together and roll up our sleeves and do something. The idea for doing the book, it basically arose organically. We say, mashallah, I was in the camp all the time, and I know we'll talk about this more in a little bit. But I was smelling all this delicious food, and I was wondering, where are the women? Because the men are all working in the souks, with the street food and things. And then one day, I mentioned the diaries. A teenage girl, she was keeping a diary for me, and she wrote down my very first recipe. She wrote it in English, and it was a recipe for cake. And I was thinking, oh, we have to do something here. Something that I learned very quickly is that the food in the Arab world is just incredible. It's delicious. But when you're talking to Arabs, they'll argue about who are the best cooks, the same thing we do everywhere else in the world. And everyone will mention Lebanon. And of course, Lebanon is just next to Syria. And, before World War I, it was all part of Greater Syria within the Ottoman Empire. So Lebanese food is spectacular. And then they'll say, Palestine food is just incredible. But then everyone will grow a little quiet and they'll say, voila, that is Syria. The Syrian food is number one. And the Syrian food differs across Syria. Most of the cookbooks that are out there are from Aleppo, known as Halab in Arabic. But our book, most people are from the south that I mentioned, from the region called Jarrah. So the food is different because the landscape is different, the techniques are different, and things like this. I like to think of Zaatari as the world's most exclusive restaurant. And now the reason I say this is because the food is spectacular. Really, I cannot tell you how amazing the food is because it's made with such love. It's incredible. But also because it's so difficult to access Zaatari. So even if you got a permit to go into Zaatari, you cannot go to somebody's home. You need another permit for this. You have to be invited and you have to be there at the right time of day and things like this. So Zaatari is the world's most exclusive restaurant. But I do challenge everyone after today to find Syrian food here in Vancouver. Go experience and taste this food yourself. And that's kind of a nudge for Nihal, because she has this wonderful restaurant. And now in the book, as I'm going to tell you now in this story, is that you can't talk about food without talking about stories. Food and stories go together. And also in the Arab world, poetry is so important. When I was doing work with UNHCR over the years, we'd ask somebody, what is your job, what is your profession? It is not unusual for somebody to say, I am a poet. When I'm working with the Zaatari Camp Libraries and you ask people what kind of books do you want, they all want poetry. Poetry is very, very important, just like it is with music. Art, of course, and you're going to see some of the fantastic paintings from Zaatari. There are so many artists. You cannot talk about Zaatari Camp without talking about the Quran, or talking about Islam, because it just guides every moment of your day. And so much food is mentioned in the Quran as well. And of course, this all ties in as well with Arab medicine, because you think of the golden age in Islamic culture, and that the earliest libraries, all of this stuff has to do with using food to keep the body healthy, and using food to fix any kind of condition that you have. So I want to start here now, but what is a cookbook? Here's a short story. Back in 2016, I was, because, I almost went to the Stratford Chef School. I thought I was going to be a chef, but instead I went to Western Ontario, did a PhD in information science. So I've always been a foodie, love food. And I said to UNHCR one day, I said, what do you think, if I work with the people in the camp and we do a cookbook? And the next day they came back and they said, yalla, Karen, go do the cookbook. So then I started talking with women in the camp, and they all said, tamam, which means yes, let's do a cookbook. And then they said to me, Karen, what is a cookbook? What is a cookbook? Because I mentioned that we don't have books in the camp. And, cookbooks, if anyone brought a book when they were fleeing Syria, it was the family Quran, right? They brought the Quran with them. Nobody had cookbooks anyway, because they all learned to cook from their mother, their grandmother, other members of their family. And in a way, not having knowledge of what is a cookbook, it was really, really freeing for us, because it just left it wide open to talk about what is a recipe and all the different things that go into it. This beautiful shot that you see here, this is actually from my iPhone, believe it or not. And this is fator for breakfast. And you can see it's like little small dishes, and we serve them on a big tray. We all sit on the floor, and then you get a piece of bread, and you just use the bread to scoop, and everybody shares. And we always drink chai, very sweet, very, very sweet black tea with breakfast. And after this, then you start having Turkish coffee, which is actually Syrian coffee and has a great story behind it. Okay, so all right, we're in Zaatari, and we all say, yalla, let's go start, on this cookbook. So we decided to have a workshop. Remember I told you about these gatherings? This was so fascinating, because usually a workshop in Zaatari, 20, 25 people, maybe 15 people, and they're always gendered. So you have just, female teenagers, boys, or just men and just women. Word got out that we were going to do a book about food from Zaatari Camp, and this is inside a tent. And there's actually 140 people here. It's about maybe 44 or 45 degrees Celsius. It's in July. Remember, we're on the desert. And no, it's just fascinating that you see here men and women. They're sitting at separate tables. But the word about this book went viral around Zaatari. You know, people were talking about it on WhatsApp. Everybody, it was food in Syria. So, of course, everyone, wants to make some kind of a contribution. So we were talking about a recipe. What goes into a recipe? So the people in camp, what they said is that they wanted to have their name and their age. But now, this is not anybody's real name. They're all aliases. And that's because they're refugees and they're, protected by the UN. And this is just the nature of war. You have to protect people. But they did say that they wanted to, instead of saying, I'm Karen Fisher or I am Dr. Karen or something like this, they wanted to be called Muhammad. And means mother of Muhammad. Or maybe Abu Muhammad, which would be father of Muhammad, things like this. Their age, and then their village in Syria. But at the same time, when you look at the book, the place names are correct, but maybe that recipe didn't actually come from the village, and that is, again, just a form of protection for people. And then there's a district in Zaatari. I told you that Zaatari is vast. Zaatari is divided into 12 sectors, or 12 districts. We call them D1, D2, D3, things like this. So then, of course, is the ingredients and the amounts, and this was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious, because the people were writing down their recipes with a gold Sharpie on heavy linen paper. And then I'd give the pages to a marvelous camp artist, and he would do a watercolor that would illustrate the ideas, on the page. And the women would say things, an ingredient is spice. Spice, just spice. And no amounts for anything, or maybe they might say something like, 1 jar lid, or 1 coffee cup. Now, you have to do the crosswalk here, because they're not talking about, a mug, size of a mug from Timmy's, right? They're talking about a finjan, a little tiny or coffee cup. And, or they say like 1 jar lid. Well, you have to know what is a jar lid, or the size of it, things like this. And then there would be the, it said the amounts, and then the actual instructions. Sometimes they could be very, very vague. It could just be some ingredients. And I know this is an incredible dish because I've had this dish for kabsa or whatever it is, prepared by this person. And they might say something like, cook until the golden color. Cook until the golden color. Or just put on the fire. And you have to understand what a fire is in Zaatari Camp. And you'll see some down in the pictures. The people, the women, they've never seen a cookbook. And they were so professional. Really, it's just so humbling for me. They were adamant that you'd have to explain how to serve the dish, because that is just as important as the food. They would talk about having the eye to beauty, how they adorn every dish. You're in a refugee camp. You hardly have anything. But what you do have is the food that you're making for your family. And this is all about, for a few moments, for 1 hour, making everybody feel safe and that they're connected to their heritage. So how to serve it, and why it's good for you. For example, during Ramadan, why did we start all of the meals first with adas, lentil soup? Why do we have heavier dishes in the winter? All of these types of things. And then they also want to talk about why they like this recipe, why it is special for them. And some of the stories for this are really, really funny. So you'll see that in the table of contents for the book. What is a table of contents, right? This is what the book took us 6 years, but it's just so incredibly rewarding. So they wanted to basically share their food culture in terms of a day in the life in the camp. So this is why we start with welcome coffee. And after that, we get into fator, we get into breakfast. After that, you go on what's called a jawle, which is a tour around the camp with boys on their bicycles, because Syrians are not allowed in Jordan to hold driver's licenses. And the only cars inside the camp, little Toyota pickups and stuff, are used by the UN and other organizations. So bicycle is the main form of transportation, but women do not ride bicycles. Instead, they'll sit on the back of the bicycle wearing an abaya. I don't know how they do it. But so this is what you do with the boys. After that, you meet some of the young women in the camp, teenagers, the tall tiger girls. These inspiring girls enjoy reading. And as you meet these girls, you get the recipes. And I tell you, these recipes are not necessarily simple just because they're young. I mean, they're really complicated things. And I've been with the girls, and their knife skills are just incredible, how they get everything to just the perfect uniform size and things like that. And then after that, we go to the Champs-Élysées. Shams is Arabic for Damascus. It's also just for all of Syria. But of course, if we go to Paris, we have the Champs-Élysées. In Zaatari, they call it the Champs-Élysées, okay? And this is where all the 3,500 shops that I was telling you about, there's a lot of them. And this is where you get the street food. So you meet the mostly men who work in all the different shops, and you get their recipes for shawarma and, and baklava, things like that. And after all of this, we return to the people's homes. We go to their caravans for a gada, which is lunch. And this is around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I just love being in camp at this time because you can walk around the different districts. And I swear that any day, everybody's making shish barak, which is one of my favorite dishes. It's known as old man's ear. But you can smell all of the aromas from Syria, from Dera, all across Zaatari Camp. Everything goes very, very still. After all of this, of course, we decided, we get into recipes for our Ramadan. We learn all about Ramadan recipes. After Ramadan, in Zaatari Camp, but in much of the Arab world, the Islamic world, after Ramadan, it's wedding season, because nobody gets married during Ramadan, right? So right after, the wedding season kicks in. And of course, after weddings, I call that Habibi, my love. After this, we get into Akika. And Akika is the ritual to celebrate the birth of a newborn. And for this, if you're a boy, if your family has the means, they will slaughter 2 sheep, typically sheep, or if it's a girl, it'll be 1 sheep. But of course, this means barbecue. So in this section, Akika, you get all the barbecue recipes. And like barbecue all around the world, barbecue is men's domain. This is where the men come out and they show their stuff for cooking. But to be honest with you, there's a lot of recipes in the book that are by men. And then after this, we get into sweets and the pantry and so forth. But you can get a sense of the life cycle of the book. Just for building the book, this is not a perfect circle by any stretch, but we talk about getting the recipes, getting them illustrated, co-cooking in the caravans. We had a cooking contest that we organized on the fly in 4 days. It was so much fun because the Syrians, they set the rules for the cooking contest, and they told me what they wanted for prizes. So I said, okay, let me go ask the camp boss from UNHCR. And of course, anyone want to take a guess what their number 1 requested prize was? Immigration to Canada. But of course, we couldn't offer that. The second requested prize, I think, was sharp knives. No, that was off the list. So we ended up with very practical prizes, things that would make women's lives easier in the camp and were energy efficient, so like pressure cookers, that type of thing. All the recipes had to be translated, so many stories about that as well. One of my colleagues is from Damascus, and I was asking him, I said, where's the recipe for shawarma, the famous sandwich? He said, no, Karen, I didn't include it because that's not the proper way that we do it in Damascus. And I said, no, it doesn't matter. This is how they cook it in camp. This is, yalla, we need the recipes. Then we had so many recipes. We had maybe 1,200 recipes, I think. Now, some of them were, there was a bit of overlap. So then the women, they'd come together in groups and we would focus just on breakfast recipes, just on this, just on that. And they would look at all the recipes and they'd say, no, and they'd put it on the floor, all right? They just chuck the recipe. Or they'd say, no, this needs to be combined, or no, this part is missing, So we went through this period of refinement. Another big challenge was getting a publisher. You cannot just contact a publisher. You have to have a literary agent. You cannot just contact a literary agent because everybody has a memoir. Everybody has some kind of book, that they want to publish. So that was very challenging to get a literary agent. And of course, our agent is in Toronto and our publisher is in Fredericton, New Brunswick. So this is such a wonderful Canadian Zaatari Syrian initiative that we did. So then there was more cooking, stories, stepping back, thinking of what is missing in the book? What do we not have here? Creating pseudonyms for everything. Then there was the food photography. Our literary agent said, oh, Karen, you have to have, this is something I never even thought about, right? Food photography. apparently it's not more than an art, no, it's a science. And he said, you have to have one of the best food photographers in the world. And this is like during COVID, which made everything more difficult. But, food photographers are very, very expensive. It takes a long time to get on their schedule. And we'd have to find the food photographer who'd be able to capture the essence of the Zaatari. So we did all this, and then we, in Zaatari, we started doing all of it. I'll just show you some photos here, home visits and cooking. This is the women making their kippah. This is a shot from our cooking contest. I called it the magluba versus the basbousa cream, because it was a tie. And the judges got into a big fight over, who should be the winner. I mentioned about the food photography, the beautiful background photography in the book. This is all by Syrians in the camp over the years, as well as, some from my iPhone. This beautiful picture, that's falafel, of course. We had to have props. That's what I did. It was my job. It was collecting antique Syrian dishes and things like that. And then at the end of it, there was consent. Once the publisher decided these are the final photographs, my colleague Mohammed, who couldn't be here today, but inshallah he will be leaving for Canada tomorrow. We were just waiting for his visa to get approved. We had to go find all these people inside Zaatari Camp. People had moved away. Some people had passed away. It was a great time, but that was also very time-consuming to do it. This is for the barbecue I told you about, akika, and this is a sample of what one of the original pages looked like. It was handwritten with those gold Sharpies and then illustrated by an artist. I have all these pages. They deserve to be in an archive somewhere, and I hope maybe one of these days some students or somebody will come along and do that. So why is our book so special? It is 100% Zaatari. There's a lot of books out there to support refugees, but there is nothing on the scale of what we have done. Over 2,000 Syrians themselves, finding a publisher, everything that we had to do. One of our primary aims is to counter domicide, because you think with war, with conflict, it's also about the destruction of people's homes, the destruction of their culture, all the memory just gone. So we want to counter domicide. So in this, we're also talking about preserving memories, knowledge, the way of life, to document people's resilience and innovation during this time in the refugee camp, to describe the social nature of cooking in Zaatari, because it's not just the eating that's social, it's the food preparation itself. Talking about how you can use the old ways to forge futures, and also about creating new livelihoods and supporting education in the camp. And over here I brought along some of the spices that we use in our cooking and some of the products that we're working on right now. And something I'm very proud of is that all of the royalties for our book return to the people of Zaatari. And it's a wonderful problem for them to have in the future, decide how to use the money. It'll be for scholarships to support innovation for women and things like this. We had a lot of different challenges for the book, inclusion and protection, most of these things here that I've mentioned. But this is a scene from Zaatari in the winter. Yes, we're in the desert, but when it rains, it rains. Just some B-roll by Syrians, that are in the book. Some beautiful photographs over the years. Here on the bottom, this is weddings in the camp. For our book launches in Amman, we had a VIP launch in Amman with the Canadian ambassador, the Canadian Minister for International Development, and ambassadors from other countries. But what you see here, this box, this is a cooker that I mentioned earlier. It's a big box. You connect it to a propane tank, and it's just incredible what the women can churn out of this cooker. Just incredible. There's no dial on it to control the temperature, nothing like that. This is inside Zaatari Camp, the women preparing that really super yummy dish that I called a shish barak. They're cooking it socially. In Zaatari Camp last Sunday, we had the launch for 250 people, because we had to celebrate, of course, inside the camp. And 12 women came together, they cooked together, and this is what they're doing. And as I call out here, the secret to the very best shish barak is adding just a little bit of tomato sauce. Here you can see the women themselves working together all through the night. And just to wrap up here, some of the new products that we're creating, and we're being supported by UNHCR Innovation in Geneva for this, is we're creating products that lean into the Syrian culture, but do not, that are unique, they're innovative. We're not competing with products that are being made by other but say in the host country in Jordan or by other, refugee Syrian groups and so forth. We're trying to be very innovative. So this, of course, is our Christmas stocking line made out of fabric from Syria. We're doing Santa hats, Syrian style. And another thing that we're doing are called magluba dolls. Magluba is Arabic for upside down. So what's so wonderful about these dolls, they're all completely handmade. The faces, everything hand embroidered. The fabrics are all from Syria. But each doll represents a story. So say, for example, we have Scheherazade, 1001 Nights. On the top is Scheherazade, but you turn her upside down and she's going to be Aladdin. Right? So all of this. Oh, this one. This doll, she's very, very famous. Look at the beautiful dress. So this is Kulthum from Egypt, right? Oh, Habibi. And what's really wonderful is that if you turn her upside down, you'll see from our entertainment earlier, we have an oud player from her orchestra that would be playing with her. And of course, he's wearing the Syrian hat here, Tarbouch. So I want to thank everyone. Here's another scene, photo. This is, as mentioned, there's no bicycles. We have a lot of donkey carts as taxis, and also for selling vegetables around and so forth. We were so blessed to have different sponsors for the book. The UNHCR, of course, for supporting us in different ways. But I cannot thank the Canadian government, the people of Canada, enough for believing in us, because it was through a Canadian initiative fund in Jordan that enabled us to reach our dream, and for me to be here today, and for our book to be here with everyone. So shukran, thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to the next chat and taking questions. Thank you.
Can everybody, is it on? Can everybody hear me okay? Can I start? Yeah, okay. Thank you everybody for being here, and thank you so much, Karen, for this beautiful presentation. Very moving. I felt like I could see parts of the camp, and I could hear the sounds, and it was really wonderful. Thank you. This book is absolutely incredible. I feel very fortunate to have had the chance to read it and have a copy of it. And thank you also. You've covered a lot of my questions, but I have more.
Closer to you.
Okay.
There we go.
So, Karen, let me ask you first about how this book came into being. You were involved in Zaatari prior to starting with the food. So what made you go to Zaatari in the first place? How did you start, and how did the book come into being?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nihal, for this wonderful question. Back in January 2015, I was invited by the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency for Jordan, myself and some university colleagues throughout the United States. There was a team of about maybe 5 or 6 of us. We were invited to Zaatari to do a project about a study on how teenagers were using their mobiles and the internet inside Zaatari Camp, and then to compare that with what their usage had been in Syria. So, as I mentioned earlier, Zaatari, the aid workers, the UN staff, and so forth, they'd leave the camp around 3 o'clock, 3:30 every day. They're not there on the weekends. So one of my roles as an ethnographer was more than just talking to people, but to come up with techniques for people to share what life is like 7/24 in the camp, and to share the kind of stories and situations where they were using their mobiles and the internet.
Okay, amazing. So you mentioned being an ethnographer, and then, when you guys pick up the book and go through it, it feels not just like a cookbook, it feels also like it's an ethnography. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your approach writing the book, and the importance of foregrounding the culture, the customs, and the culinary traditions of the people alongside with the recipe.
You cannot separate it. You cannot separate food from culture. Is anyone here from Newfoundland by any chance? East Coast? Well, it doesn't matter where you're from in culture or across Canada. But the culture is just so much a part of the food. You know, growing up in Newfoundland, I have such memories. My father's a fisherman, you know, a hunter, and my grandparents were from a little tiny island off the coast of Newfoundland. And, you know, they resettled during the 1950s, you know, to St. John's. But I just have all these wonderful memories of my grandmother coming to me one day and say, Karen, today you're going to learn how to make bread. And I come home from school and she'd have raisin buns, you know, tea buns made and things like this. And that is just part of knowing who you are and how the food is just wrapped up into all of it. Even if you're not a cook, food stays with you. I've worked with immigrant and refugee youth from around the world, and it was just something that's always been an important theme. And so inside Zaatari, I was interested in the food, but I don't know, it's like I'm an ethnographer and in Newfoundland, I just had to know more about it. How did you learn how to do this? Where is this dish? And then when I was talking with, you know, Jordanians, other Arabs around, I noticed that they'd get into these big discussions and arguments as well about where, you know, coffee originally, you know, where it came from and other dishes. What's the same is, you know, one of the things that I've learned is that no matter where you go around the world, people are the same. There's really not that much difference. The similarities, you know, are that draw us together are so tight and so strong.
Very much so, very much so. So you're originally from Newfoundland, where family is very important and communities are very tightly knit. So I wanted to ask you about the similarities you found in terms of families in Newfoundland and families amongst the Syrians you've met.
Wow, that's a great question. You know, this might sound a little bit weird for people, but I consider Zaatari Camp to be my second home. I am just it's my happy place. And you know, you ask anyone in Zaatari, you know, what do you want? Everybody wants to travel, of course. You know, it's their futures, and you know, the life in the camp is so difficult. But at the same time, there's just something about the community there. And at the University of Washington, I teach about community, and this is something, sadly, that we've certainly lost a lot in the United States. You know, they talk about social capital has declined. I know the same thing in Newfoundland. You know, we're having our 40th high school reunion coming up in July. Everyone is spread out around the world. We don't stay where we were from. And in Zaatari, even though everyone is displaced, the culture is there. It is so strong. And like there's many traditions that they continue in Zaatari Camp that have been lost, completely lost in Syria and lost in other parts of the world. And I'll give you one example of this during Ramadan. For Sahur, when you wake up early in the morning to pray, and you do this before, you know, the sun comes up and everything. It was tradition in Syria for, it could be a musician, but it could be anyone with a pot and, you know, something, you know, to bang it with. But they basically go around and tell everybody, oh, time to wake up, time to pray. And in Syria, they would wear the traditional costume. It's kind of like what you see underneath the kultum there. And in Zaatari, you know, it's still the same. But this is something, you know, a tradition that has faded. And we have something similar, well, similar but very different. Of course, in Newfoundland, at Christmas time, we have a tradition that is called mummering. And mummering, there's another word for it, like janning, and I don't know why. It stayed in Newfoundland. I don't know where else they do it around the world. I hear there's a mummers parade every year in Philadelphia. But in Newfoundland, you know, for the official 12 days of Christmas, you know, you start on Boxing Day, and you disguise yourself, and you go to your neighbor's house, and you knock on the door, and you say, any mummers allowed in? They invite you in, and you have food and drink, and you sing, and you dance, and you play music, and then they have to try and guess who you are, you know? But this is a wonderful tradition that has died off in Newfoundland for different reasons, and one is just safety. I mean, really, would you let some, you know, people dress very weirdly, knock on your door and say they want to come in and drink your, you know, have your drink and eat your food and everything? Would you let them in? Probably not, right? We don't do that so much anymore. So this is another reason about Zaatari, that there was a lot of parallels for me growing up in Newfoundland about community.
That's beautiful. Telling the stories of the people in Zaatari is a big responsibility, but also a great opportunity to bring their stories to the world. I want to ask you about you. How does it feel to be the person who relays all of these incredible experiences and the stories of these amazing people who face so much hardship but still preserve their culture? How does it feel to be that person?
That is such a personal question.
I know.
Huh? Such a personal question. For me, it's just been the honor of my life. I can't tell you how proud I am of what we've done together. Everybody together. It's been a sad journey because some of the people have passed away who were really important and formative along this journey inside Zaatari Camp. But it's just been the honor of a lifetime to do this. And to be honest with you, I didn't want my name to be down as the author of the book. I didn't feel like this is not my book. This is the camp. But our literary agent said, "No, Karen," and I know this because I know a librarian in the past. You have to have somebody's name on the front of the book because you have to be able to catalog it and index it in a library. You have to be able to search for it, on Amazon. And but I don't know. I just felt it was just so much of an honor for me. But then there's no way you can have a book with 2,000 co-authors listed on it either. And then we'd have the problem of all those aliases there. But it has been completely life-changing for me. And also for my, for my family. I have my teenagers. My son's now 18, my daughter's 21, and my family in Newfoundland. But everyone has just been so supportive, and it's really affected them as well.
It's wonderful. I'm going to transition a little bit to talk about the food now. So in the book you write, Syrians are known to be the best cooks in the Arab world, and eating at Zaatari is proof. We eat as if we're at one of the world's most exclusive restaurants. I know exactly what you mean, as I work with Syrian women every day, and the food is incredible. Tell us a little bit about how exquisite Syrian cuisine is and what you think is the reason behind the remarkable brilliance of this food, this cuisine.
Oh, that's another really, really great question. As a professor of information science, at the University of Washington, I teach a course called Information Behavior, and we talk about what is information, how do we share information. And, information is not just something that we see on our phones. It's not something that we read in a book. Music is information, as we heard just earlier. But information can also be something that's embodied. I mean, just think about how does a dancer learn a particular dance? Sure, there might be some notation or something, but it's something that you learn inside your body. It's also just think of, for example, of firefighters. It's fascinating if you listen to firefighters and like a training exercise, but how they describe heat, how your body feels it. And this is something I really observed in Zaatari Camp about how the women cook. I have so many videos of how they work things, with their hands. So that is absolutely perfect. And this again, harkens back to when I was in Newfoundland. My grandmother was teaching me how to make bread. You don't use measurements. Instead, it's right. If you don't use measurements, it's really about the touch, how it registers with your body, how is the smell, and things like this. Yeah. So there's that element, and then there's just also the element of knowing, how somebody is feeling if they're sick, or if it's during Ramadan, if it's in the summer, if it's in the winter time, what dish would be most appropriate to help that person to create a happy memory for them, and then serving the dish, with that eye to beauty. It doesn't matter if it's chicken and potato, which can be a very simple recipe, but at the same time it can be so delicious in its simplicity. And then it's all about how it's presented on that big platter and the garnishes that are used. So it's all of these things.
They say the eyes eat before the mouth, don't they? So it has to be visually beautiful.
Exactly.
In order to be able to present
the eye eats before the belly.
Yeah, exactly. I know you've touched upon this a little bit in your presentation, but talk to us a little bit more about how you standardize the recipes, because as you said, Syrians cook with their eyes and hands, and they say a little bit of this and a lot more of that. And so how did you standardize, and how did you curate which recipes to include in the book?
Yeah, if you're publishing a book, like a cookbook, there is a limit. You'll see that a typical book might, and this has to do with publishers' rules, how they do things. And typically a cookbook might have maybe 50, 60 recipes, 70 or 80, and you're pushing it. And I had to explain to our agent, no, we have to have that 130. Okay, sure, we have 10 recipes for tea, for chai, but you can count that as one recipe, in terms of how they do the math. As I said, I have it all in software called Airtable. All the original recipes, were scanned and things. to try and figure out, okay, if we put these into groups, how many different recipes do we have, say, for mandi? And sometimes different names are used for a dish, which is very common, or maybe they're spelled in different ways, or maybe the person couldn't remember the name of the dish. And can I tell you a story here?
Please.
Okay, so I mentioned about the magluba dolls. So magluba means upside down. And in all of the recipes that we have, I share stories, and I love the story of magluba. Now, if you're on YouTube, magluba is considered a Palestinian dish, and the ceremonious action of flipping the magluba upside down, you need to see this on YouTube, because some people are pure professionals. I've seen people flip 3 or 4 maglubas all at the same time. I don't know how they do it, these big dishes. So anyway, I was thinking, well, okay, what's the story of magluba? So there's a couple of different stories for it. So one of the most famous people in Arab history, and it's like he only died, 5 years ago instead of, well over 1,000 years ago, let's put it that way. And in English, we call him Saladin. In Arabic, it's Salah ad-Din, right? So you probably have heard of Saladin, right? Salah ad-Din. And he's very, very famous in the Arab world. He was the ruler of Syria and Egypt. And this is the time of the Crusades. So, of course, we all know about the Crusades, right? From Monty Python, to, how many other different movies have we seen about the Crusades? But it's usually told from the Western perspective. So I was fascinated about the Arab perspective on this. So basically, King Richard, Lionheart, he's leading, I think, maybe the 3rd Crusade. They're coming down, through Lebanon and everything. And Salah ad-Din, he shows up with his army. And he's victorious. He wins Jerusalem back. So they're going to have a victory dinner, as you would, for Salah ad-Din. So the people ask them, they say, oh, Salah ad-Din, what would you like to have to celebrate your great victory, from the Crusaders? And he couldn't remember the name of the dish. So he said, that dish that they serve upside down. Right? So this is why it became known as magluba. There's one story. But if we keep it with the Crusades, there's another story about this as well. And maybe both stories are correct. But the other story is that the women of Palestine, if you have an army going through, they eat a lot of food, and they eat the local food, right? They don't just, bring it from Paris or London, or, if you're on the Crusades, or, from Damascus or something, whatever side that you're on. So anyway, in Palestine, and it's like in Jerusalem, the women got really upset with every time the soldiers came by, they would steal their food. So being very clever, what do you think they did?
They threw the food.
When they made the pot, they put the meat in the very bottom.
Yeah.
And then the vegetables, and then they topped it with the rice. So when the soldiers came along, they'd smell something, and they'd lift up the lid, and they go, no meat here, this is only rice, and they'd keep going. Right, so this is like the story behind magluba, and then why you would flip it upside down after, so you could see all the meat on the top. So, you can't remember the name of the dish, Salah ad-Din, or it's the women, keeping the food for their families. And I'm sure there's other stories out there too. But that's just a couple that I really like and are in the book.
Thank you for sharing these stories. They're wonderful. So in the book, about two-thirds of the recipes belong to women and a third belong to men. As someone who works exclusively with Syrian women, I'm curious about what your experience has been in terms of who cooks. Is there a division of labor in the home between men and women cooking? And I'm also curious, are both men and women entrepreneurial in the camp, or is it a realm that is exclusive to men?
Yeah, there's 2 questions there. And the entrepreneurial part, I got to tell you, every Syrian that I have met has been extremely entrepreneurial and innovative. Syrians are just famous for that, famous for entrepreneurship. And this is why you saw the economy of Zaatari, kick off so fast in just 6 months. Oh my gosh, you should see them. I mean, I've seen these little videos from Zaatari about women, how to accomplish your tasks and be thrifty when you have nothing. So say, for example, they could take a piece of clothing that maybe they would, get for free somewhere, and there's a little video, and they will say, this is how you can make 2 sets of pajamas out of this. This is how you can just repurpose everything has a use. Even when you're making a dish that's called fatayr, where it's wonderful, it's the bread and the different kinds of fillings, and they make it over I'm going to say a cooker. I wouldn't call it a cooker, but it's a
Saj. Like
yeah,
saj.
it's called a sage, but it's a domed oven. Anyway, they have the bread, okay, which it's a feast, incredible how they make it. But then they have, I think it's called a karma, the pillow that they use to flip the bread onto the sage. For this, they would make it from the UNHCR canvas tent, the tents that people used to live in. One thing in the camp is that every single thing has a purpose. And a lot of it is just so clever. Now, in terms of the cooking, everyone will say, yeah, I can cook everything, I can make that. Yes, no doubt. But there are definitely some dishes that some people are just really, really famous for. And this is why when we're preparing different things for the book and the different events, we knew what the menu was going to be and who would be like the absolute most incredible to come, work on this dish for us. And then some of it, can be depending on what is being made. So for some things, that are really, really complicated, maybe some of the older women, or like for the younger girls in the camp, the teenagers, they would start by making salads, So yeah, absolutely. And then there's dishes that are associated with men. But I can't tell you the number of times, like for example, some of the mamoul cookies, which are really famous during Ramadan. And the person who made those in the book, it was a man, and he was a new father. And he was making all this wonderful food for his wife, who just, had their baby the day before.
That's so lovely. I want to ask you about the residents of Zaatari. So, what do the chefs and the writers featured in this book hope to get out of it? How do you make sure that it continues to impact their lives?
Yeah, another great question. When we had the launch in Zaatari, for the 250 people, everybody knew about the book. And, all the time in Zaatari, people would say, Karen, where is our book? Where is the book? Because publishing in the Arab countries is quite different from publishing in Canada, publishing in the West. For example, in Jordan, other Arab countries, if you have a book, you just bring your file to a printer, you pay the printer, and then you show up with the truck, he gives you your boxes of books, and you go sell them yourself. The publishing is all very, very different. So, and like I said, we don't have many books inside the Zaatari. And some of the books these days in the Arab world, they don't have a lot of color photos. So you will, if you do find a recipe book, chances are it's just text. There's no illustrations to go with it. Or if there is something, it's maybe black and white, so forth. So when I started getting drafts of our book, the full book, everyone was so impressed. In fact, when we finished the food photography, we were showing it, everyone around camp, being the team, and it didn't matter if they were Syrians inside the camp or it was Jordanians outside the camp, just anywhere. People could not believe that this food had been prepared, styled and everything, and photographed inside Zaatari. There was just such immense sense of pride that we did this. And just because you're living in a refugee camp, yes, it's very distressing in ways, but at the same time, the food is exquisite, very, very clean. Especially how the women keep their homes. And I've had a lot of food poisoning around the world, I'll tell you. But I have never, ever, ever gotten sick at Zaatari Camp. And I just eat, I drink the same water, the same food as everybody else. It's just the quality of everything that they're doing there. So a lot of pride.
It's so beautiful. I'm going to pose one last question, and then we're going to open it up for a Q&A. My last question to you is, Zaatari Camp is an incredible place full of remarkable people, and all of its inhabitants are from different places. Tell us a little bit about the hopes and dreams of the people in Zaatari and where they might see themselves in the future.
Well, I wish Mohammed was here
to
answer this question. The hopes, well, there's always a couple of answers to this. Everyone will tell you that they want to return to Syria. Of course, everybody wants to go home. I want to go home to Newfoundland. Everybody wants to return to their home. For Syria, that's very difficult, because I mentioned earlier about countering the effects of domicide. People's homes have been literally destroyed. You're talking about landmines, that are, and like we know this from other countries, they're going to be there for decades, and it's such hazardous work to try and find them, and destroy them. Oh my gosh, the infrastructure in Syria, you cannot go back, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And something else, though, about the nature of war is that war lasts for decades, centuries, for generations. And this is another reason that, people will not be able to return, anytime soon. So that said, if you ask people, what do they want futures for their children. Really, they want, so many of the Syrians are so smart, and they want to, they're going to go to university. Okay, they might get a scholarship, but then they don't have the money to pay for their books, for transportation to get to the university, and then afterwards, where are you going to get a job? But so they want, futures for their children, to be able to have, a decent living, to have a livelihood, because as I said, war goes on for so long, but the public attention span for war is just a blink of an eye. After Syria, okay, the Ukraine war, and now we have everything that is happening in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have old wars, other conflicts around the world that literally have been going on for decades. But there's, we just move on from it. So what do people want? Of course, everybody would love to immigrate. I mean, I wish if I could have anything fulfilled, it would be able to just pick up Zaatari Camp and just bring it to some part of Canada, or maybe, the people go, the different parts. But it would just be such a benefit for Canada to have people who are so decent and so caring and so loving and so entrepreneurial and so hardworking. I just wish that I could change the life of everybody, because I know that that's what they aspire to.
Totally understand what you mean. Thank you, Karen. Okay, we're going to open it up for Q&A. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. Yes, please.
You discussed that getting books into the camp is one of the most difficult parts of it, but you didn't talk much about the library project and how it even started. If books are so difficult to get into it, what was the process of starting it, and did you bring any cookbooks in?
So the question is about the library project. You didn't talk much about the library project. Did you bring any cookbooks in there, access to books in the camp, and so on?
For libraries?
Yes.
Oh gosh, that's a whole other story. One day I was in Zaatari, maybe my first or second visit there before I started living in Jordan full time, and I was at a community center in the camp, and I saw this, it was a caravan like the people live in, and I walked in and it was a library. I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it. And then I explored around the camp. Every time I'd go to any kind of, because the community centers are sponsored by different international organizations, to see if there was a library. So it started with this, and I would find libraries in the oddest little places around the camp. So I said to UNHCR, I said, you have all these libraries, and they said, oh wow, this is really great. And I said, how about if we bring all the libraries together? And this is something also very unique for the people that I work with inside Zaatari. We came together and we created our own library system. We called it Zaatari Camp Libraries. We started doing training. I mean, they're real librarians, but they haven't been to university to study librarianship. And we started collaborating on all different kinds of things. We had training in how to do story time for children. We started, little free library boxes, those things. We put them around the camp for places where it would be difficult for someone to access one of the libraries that I was talking about. But then everything got shut down by COVID. When COVID hit, because in Zaatari, Jordan itself immediately closed down all of its land, air, seawater, and you couldn't leave your house in Jordan. But for Zaatari Camp, for refugee settings in Jordan, it was even more vital, because the houses are all joined, next to each other. The people live so close together, and so many children, because you know how children are, trying to get them to wash their hands and all that stuff. And of course, nobody really knew what we were dealing with, in the early days of COVID-19. Anyway, long and short of it is that our library system fell apart. As I mentioned earlier about, people forgetting about war, accompanied with that is something that we call donor fatigue.
Yes.
Donor fatigue, and unfortunately it's a real thing. Yeah. So the funding for Zaatari Camp is really, really dropped off, because countries, Canada, Germany, Sweden, they only have so much money in the public purse that they can use to support different causes around the world. So with every new situation that arises, whether it's something that's a natural disaster, or whether it's conflict, just anything, then that means there's less of the pie, for, other commitments that you have. So we've really seen that inside Zaatari Camp, the number of international organizations that have lost their funding, been defunded, and it's just really unfortunate for the community that there's less means there to help and support them. And unfortunately, our libraries is one of those casualties. But we will rise again. We will return.
Yes, you will. Yes, you will. Yes, sir.
So normalizing the cooking and the cuisine is a really important emotional mitigation for people who've been suffered the trauma of displacement. But it's super challenging in refugee camps that don't have a sort of porosity with the local community and the outside world. And you described Zaatari as being a high security, challenging place to move from the camp into the host community. But you described this incredible entrepreneurism in the camps, which is normal, but again, it requires that kind of porosity. But also in the food photographs, we see, we see za'atar, we see fresh tomatoes and other vegetables, we see mint. One of the challenges in the refugee situation, of course, is that these are not the kind of things that World Food Program provides in the camps. Can you describe the challenges of normalizing cooking and cuisine in Zaatari, given the kind of walled-off
Yep.
situation that they find themselves in? How close are they to sources of this stuff?
So the question is, how do we normalize cooking and cooking your home recipes when there is a challenge in finding and providing all the ingredients you need, given the securitization of the camp and the fact that goods don't move easily in and out of the camp? How do we cook and overcome that challenge? Did I get that?
Thank you.
Did I get
Thank you for that lovely question. This is where that Syrian ingenuity comes in, the refugee ingenuity. They're very, very good at making something stretch. So if they don't have a lot of money, because I talk about the donor fatigue, for example, World Food Program used to give you a monthly allowance per person in the camp. That is, in the past few months, that has been cut in half. So there's a lot of food insecurity in Zaatari. As much as I'm here today to celebrate the cuisine and the culture, the people are suffering. So one of the things, for example, the women will do is they'll cook more with grains, with legumes, and with vegetables. So with less meat. And it's what people do around the world, of course. And then for other types of ingenuity for what they need, they have different ways of bringing it in. I mentioned earlier about Syrians, being foodies. There are times that they're able to get some of the most essential ingredients that they need for their cooking will be brought across the border from Syria. So say, for example, what we called saman. It's a ghee.
Mm-hmm. Samna.
Yeah,
Ghee.
wrapping the
Ghee.
saman, which is so amazing for cooking with and has a really long shelf life. So they can get that brought across, or maybe it's going to be a particular kind of cheese, maybe it's olive oil. But at the same time, we talk about the resiliency, and I'd be in the camp, and I mean, one of the most yummy, most famous dishes for Syria is baklava, or baklava. We think of it in Greece or Turkey, baklava. And Syrians are really, really famous for the baklava. There are so many kinds, different styles and techniques, and I could eat baklava every day till it comes out of my ears, and I'm not going to tell you how much weight I gained since I started on this project. But in terms of nuts, probably there's two nuts that are considered, the very best, and that would be cashews and pistachios. So in Zaatari, they wouldn't have pistachios. So in the souks, where they sell it at what they call a sweet shop, or if you're making it in the home, they would take peanuts and dye them green,
Yes, dye them
so
green.
they'd look like pistachios.
Yeah.
Or maybe they would take coconut, because they don't even have peanuts, and they would dye the coconut green. you know, maybe putting green sprinkles on top of something, you know, the sugar green, you know, sugar crystals that are green, because that approximates what crushed pistachios would have looked like. So a lot of this is, you know, just using the imagination. And as I was writing the book, again, you know, I was thinking back to growing up in Newfoundland and all the yummy recipes that I learned how to make from my grandparents. And as I was saying, you know, growing up off, you know, on an island off the coast of Newfoundland, they didn't have a lot of fresh ingredients all the time. So the recipes that the old people had were very much, you know, they had substitutes, ways to get around it. And also, if you think of all around the world, like with World War II, for example, you know, if we didn't have, just think of how cooking changed because of World War II. What happened, right? You had instant cake mixes. All this instant food started being, you know, being made available. The TV dinner, you know, came out afterwards. Women, you know, in the workforce, and with all of this, our culinary practices changed a lot. And you know, it had to do with the circumstances at the time and using substitutes for it. But at the same time, you know, you want to cook, you know, delicious, healthy, lovely meals for your families, and at least have some kind of similitude of what life had been.
Yeah, yeah. I actually want to say something to that question as well, because I also work with Syrians. So they're incredible at something. They're incredible at nothing ever going to waste, you know. And so the same ingredient, they will create tens of recipes with that same ingredient. And there are things that I learned in my journey working with the Syrians that I would never have conceived of. I always give the example of, for instance, eggplant jam. For me, eggplant is obviously a very savory thing, but they have tens of recipes for eggplant, including something sweet like jam. And any ingredient they have, they can can it, they can dry it, they can freeze it, they can chop it up and make something else with it. Nothing ever goes to waste. And then working with the Syrians, you know, when they first came here, there were, for instance, lots of cheeses that they couldn't find that are only found in the Levant. And so the answer was always, well, I'll make it. I'll take the milk and I'll make it. So they could always create something with whatever you give them. They're very clever and very entrepreneurial, like you were saying, and very, very resourceful.
Yeah, lemon peels, orange peels to make the most, you know, delicious jam. Something that's very common in Islamic countries is it's haram throwaway food, for one thing. You know, it's not something that you do, but especially bread. You cannot throw out bread. And I'm talking about the round, you know, Arab bread. And so at night, you will see people put stacks of bread, never right on the ground, because that would be haram, but instead they leave it on a ledge somewhere, something like this, because it's considered to give thanks to Allah for His mercy and for His bounty and what is provided for you. But at the same time, we have a whole category of delicious dishes that are called fatteh, F-A-T-T-E-A-H. And it's used as the leftover bread. And we see this in other cuisines around the world. I mean, now the Italians make this beautiful soup with day-old bread in it. You know, a lot of these sort of saying that we're so alike all around the world. We have different practices that are continued. But I have to tell you, when I've had a lot of fatteh, and we have so many kinds, and we have recipes in the book. Yeah. But it took me a while before I figured out what was behind this, that it was actually a way of saving on other ingredients, because it's just so delicious. You think that the bread was made just for this purpose, to make this dish. Instead, it's got to do with the economy. And it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, everything goes back to the Quran, right, to the culture. And that, you know, it's haram to, you know, discard
Throw away food.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has a question. Okay, if I'm going to take... Okay. Okay, I'm going to take this lovely lady first. Go ahead.
Thank you just for having this event. I think it's a fascinating project. I was wondering if you could speak on who the book is actually for. And I was thinking about this because I see that the book is in English and that the recipes were translated from Arabic. So I'm just wondering who the audience is for the book.
Who is the audience for the book? The recipes are in English, but they're obviously Syrian recipes. Who's the audience for the book?
You mean the original language for the recipes?
No, who's the audience? Who's the book meant to be read by?
God, the book is for everyone in the room here. The book is for around the world. And what we want to do next is to have the book translated into different languages. Absolutely. That's going to be a whole other venture for us. But, you know, even to get the book translated into Arabic, That's really, really important.
Mm.
I struggled with this a lot because one of our donors arranged for copies of the book to be given to not all 2,000 people in the camp, but like family units and things. So I was showing the book around to people, and it's just incredible how much you communicate over photographs. So for children, for women, it would take such pride as, this, we love this dish, I made this dish, or something like that. And the children, it's like more literacy, cultural literacy. So even without having it in Arabic, we're still accomplishing something by having it in the book. And also just this tremendous sense of pride, knowing that, we did this together. But absolutely, the book is for the world, and our next mission is to get the book translated into different languages.
I think that's all we have time for now. Thank you so much, Karen, for this
Thank you.
incredible book, enriching discussion, and thank you so much, everybody, for being with us here today. We're going to be hanging out a little bit afterwards. If anyone wants to come up and ask you questions, I think that's going to be possible.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
so very much. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And I think there's a book signing over here. And I also brought these dolls, if you'd like to see them, and spices and other types of things from Zaatari Camp.
And can I put in a shameless plug? Also, if you would like to have some delicious, authentic Syrian food, please come cater from Tayybeh or come to our restaurant in Kitsilano. There's delicious Syrian food, and you can come meet the chefs also, all of whom are newcomers and refugee women from Syria. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.